Well, Governor Jared Polis, it's a real privilege and honor. As somebody who spent a lot of time in state and local government, I was an admirer of yours in your time on Capitol Hill. I know you have a long history working with education in so many different roles. And so I thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today.
John, it's really a pleasure to see you virtually, and I can't wait till we can see you again in person sometime. I look forward to updating you on some of the important work supporting our schools in Colorado.
Good, good. Well, as the son of a Coloradan, a Broomfield resident, I look forward to that as well. Let me just jump right into it, and maybe with the most obvious question, which is if you could just kind of give all of us a lay of the land in Colorado. There's so many different things are happening, so many different approaches in different states. Where are you right now in the education system's response to the pandemic? And if you could just kind of give us a quick overview, we can then jump into your thoughts and your analysis of the situation.
Really, from the start over summer, we prioritized a safe return to school, even during the period last spring when school districts were closed for in-class instruction across the country. We encouraged districts to open their buildings in safe ways, meaning many of them, we're a local control state, of course, so each district was deciding what to do, but we encouraged them to do the necessary special ed work in small groups, work with third-party providers for daycare, for critical workers. So now most of our schools are back, across the country in a safe way. I visited schools in many school districts across our state, rural schools, San Luis Valley, schools in the Denver metro area, Colorado Springs, and they're doing it right. And they're able to do it right really for a number of reasons. One is that local communication between the superintendent and teachers and families. The state is stepping up. We've just passed over 1 million masks, medical grade masks that we've given to teachers across the state. 1 medical grade mask per teacher per week for every teacher in our state. We also prioritize the CARES Act money for districts in schools in 2 ways. One we'll talk about a little bit later. It's the RISE piece, the competitive piece, but the larger piece, $510 million, went right out the door for our school districts and charter schools in Colorado.
And I mean, obviously, you have real responsibilities, of course, to make sure that these organizations are subsidized to do the things that they need to do to provide basic services in your communities. But I did want to note the RISE Fund piece. I saw the announcement recently. It jumped out at me as different. And probably not without some difficult decisions there. So could you talk us through what the RISE Fund is? And then how do you, in your mind, reconcile, the need to do some of the basics with, at the same time, knowing that the world is changing and probably the need to do some new things too?
Yeah, I think the RISE Fund we're always looking in this pandemic for what is the learning, what is the silver lining, what is the new normal that's better. In other sectors, it's things like increased telecommuting, which can decrease traffic and decrease pollution. So there's all things we're learning. So this is about what can we solve in education that's perplexed us for decades and only been accentuated during this crisis. So the bulk of the funds through the CARES Act, through the State School Finance Act, they're given out formulaically to schools per student. We have, like many states, a few risk factors built in there, but by and large, formulaically. This pot of funds from the GEAR grant is about, through the RISE Fund, is about who has been affected disproportionately. Because the truth is COVID, both from the health perspective and the economic perspective, did not affect everybody equally. We have communities with much higher unemployment. We have communities with a higher death rate. They traditionally fall along those same chasms of achievement that we have in normal times and risks making them worse. So we want to use that opportunity to do things differently, encourage our school districts, our charter schools, our institutions of higher education to serve the highest needs students in new, innovative, and effective ways, including partnerships between community colleges and school districts, really finding those best practices and then building upon the sustainability of those practices and expanding what works. Now's the time to double down on innovation.
And I really, first, I just want to commend you for that. I'm reading the model just to set a little bit of resources aside to give entrepreneurs and others the license to go solve big social problems, I think is critical. And I really appreciate it. At the same time, it's not without controversy. And we, meaning how one spends dollars is not without controversy. We have on the horizon an election that makes everything seem like it's has controversy surrounding it. And I'm wondering, you've seen this through the lens of school boards, you've seen it through the lens of charter schooling, you've seen it through the lens of Washington, of Colorado itself. What, from your perspective, is the state of education politics nationally and within your state? You've seen it from all those vantage points. From my perspective, it's changed. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about it, especially as we approach the election coming up.
Well, it was somewhat disheartening to hear, Secretary DeVos in the moments before this say that the federal role has exacerbated the achievement gap. In the real world, the single biggest federal program, Title I, by far, money to the schools that need it. And is it enough? No, but we've seen the impact of that, John. I mean, literally in the low-income schools, 2 extra literacy coaches, smaller class size. I mean, absolutely, Title I, the existence of it, the support for our low-income schools that serve low-income kids, absolutely it helps. It's not enough to close the achievement gap, but I, for one, am grateful for that federal role. And I would like to see state governments, federal districts all do more to close the achievement gap, because as a country, we want to make sure that no matter where you live, you don't fall behind or not have access to opportunities simply because you live in poverty, you're a person of color, you're in an area with a persistently failing school. We need the data, we need the accountability. I'm confident that our national dialogue will shift back to that in many ways. I think, there's been some concern that there's a lot of, like there is in politics in general now, John, there's just a lot of folks where there's kind of knee-jerk reactions one way or the other. I'm confident that President Biden will help unite us behind that shared vision that recognizes the importance of accountability that works, assessment, high quality schools, no matter what the governance, and really with a critical focus on the achievement gap.
Yeah, and I want to note, I don't know that we've got a lot to cover. I don't know we probably have the time to go too deep into it. I do think the way you just outlined a kind of very practical, what I would call child, student, and family-centered agenda is non-ideological, and it is different. The way I hear you is different from so much of the ideology that, frankly, I feel like I hear on both sides of the aisle, however one hears the Secretary's comments. Let me jump to a couple of the things that you're doing specifically, and just to commend. I want to talk about early childhood. First, I want to talk a little bit, though, about another area that I do a lot of work in. I work a lot of my time for Strata Education Network, which just made a large grant to the state of Colorado, which I'm very happy to be a part of. I've been an observer of Skillful and CareerWise and the incredible things in Denver that have gone on under Senator Bennett and Superintendent Boasberg. And at the heart of it has all been, partially at least, has all been this notion of jobs, job access as a focal point of the education system, which isn't, frankly, always how we thought about the education system. Colorado has been a national leader. I'm wondering, especially now, where is that work in its evolution? What's the next horizon for Colorado and that strand of its education program?
So we've really leaned into this, really realizing that the needs of the workplace today in growing sectors is not the same that led to the evolution of the current education system that has the paramount importance of just the high school diploma or the college diploma. It means we need to blur those lines between K-12 and industry and higher education, look at what skills are needed and how do we match the opportunity to gain those skills to kids at the high school level or the community college level so they can earn a good living in fast-growing sectors. Our school districts were in the lead in launching P-TECH high schools, dual and concurrent enrollment programs. We have many programs in our state where kids can graduate with an associate's degree from high school, even with a 5th year in high school, the SENT program, associate's degree. We've really leaned into apprenticeships, CareerWise, and other models. You mentioned Skillful. We brought our Secretary of Labor for my administration out of that movement. We're looking at really deconstructing what's needed and looking at skills-based hiring, not just across state government, but with a lot of companies leaning in. And it's not enough to just say skills-based hiring. Then you back down from that. How do we deconstruct those skills? How do we credential them? Community colleges, high schools, good for our economy, good for kids to earn, saves them time, saves them money. So our RISE fund that we talked about earlier, that's going to support some of this very kind of innovation. A key part is making sure that kids get the college credit and the credentialing and even the associate's degree while they're in high school. And we're really laser focused on helping everything we do in education, public, private, community college, school district, all of that, kind of meet the needs of students to get good jobs as they complete whatever level of education they're prepared to complete.
Yeah, just to build on that quickly, I mean, Colorado is a state, it's no secret, has seen a lot of expansion economically, has seen real growth in certain sectors, especially what you might call 21st century growth sectors. Is your focus on that a result of that, or is it a driver of that? Kind of how do you think about that issue in relation to economic opportunity and growth?
It's really both and all of the above. I mean, if you look at what has traditionally been called vocational education in high school, first of all, it still exists. We need people who cut hair. We need people that do auto shop, and those programs are great. In fact, one of our school districts built a great new program. I think it's the first vocational education facility in years. But we're also looking at what are those growth sectors, right? If people are going into be veterinary technicians or work in nursing, or they want to work with seniors, or they want to become teachers themselves, how do we open up those emerging and growing career tracks so students have access with the skills they need in a high school environment? So that's that new wave. You can call it workforce prep, you can call it vocational, whatever you call it. It's not in competition with what already exists. In fact, we want to beef those up. They're great programs. It's really putting a new lens on what are the needs of the economy today and tomorrow, and how do we prepare kids for success?
Yeah. And I think, making that case that this is not about tearing down what's working or limiting kids, but it's about expanding on it, I think is just so important. And I thank you for leading on that. Let's go back to the other end of the spectrum, though. When you Google you in education over the last couple of years, what comes up is kids who are a lot younger. And I know that you do that. It sounds great, but you got to make a case to the taxpayers that investing in a mandatory kindergarten or full day kindergarten as an option, and investing in pre-kindergarten, which is now really front and center for your agenda, is an important thing. And I do feel like very often we hear these things and we say, well, of course it's great. These kids are 4 and 5 years old. We should be doing something. That's obvious. But it's not as obvious. I mean, it comes at a cost. I mean, it's an investment for a state and for local governments. I'm wondering if you can talk about why you're doing it, what case you're making to the taxpayers of Colorado that this is where their resources should go.
Well, if we can accomplish one thing during my governorship in Colorado, it's for Colorado to move from a laggard to a leader in early childhood education, investing in our kids, investing in our future workforce, and investing in working families today, empowering women and single parents to be able to re-enter the workforce on their own terms. Look at where Colorado was a couple of years ago. We only had half-day kindergarten. Parents had to pay for full-day kindergarten. A few slots for very low income, but by and large, many families could only afford 2-3 hours a day of kindergarten. We know the benefits of full-day kindergarten, and we saw it first, second, third grade. The kids that had it, the kids that didn't. One of the first calls after I got elected was to a Republican state representative, Representative Jim Wilson of Salida, retired superintendent, who'd been working on full-day kindergarten for years. And I said, Jim, we're going to figure it out and we're going to do it. And we got it done in a bipartisan way, unanimously in the state Senate. We had, if it was easy, it would have been done. Took a lot of coalition building and a lot of work. But we were able to demonstrate the value of early childhood, the return on investment, the savings to families who couldn't afford it, the ability of single parents and women to re-enter the workforce on their own shoes, and closing the achievement gap for those who suffered. Our next step is preschool. We have no separate preschool funding statewide in Colorado. There's, again, a little bit of funding for very low income, but working families don't get it. Only a couple districts in our state have their own funding. This November, Proposition EE would tax vaping like other nicotine products, and would provide funding for a universal preschool program in Colorado that would roll out in a couple of years. So that's the next big piece. We're also focused on, of course, birth to 4, and actually, we should say, neonatal through 4, and we're looking to continue our investment in all of those because of the ROI, because it's the right thing to do, because it saves money, and because it prepares Colorado for success, not just now, but long after my governorship is over.
For moments in your statements to then sort of roll to the next question.
talk about all of these issues, Governor, is that you have a leadership position. I mean, you have a
Thank you.
Great, yeah, and we're gonna unmute the program audio.
Industry and on our issue, education is very frequently thought of as a local issue and not a state issue. Now, you've worked at the state level, the local level, and the federal level. I'm wondering, and frankly, building off some of the comments the Secretary made earlier, what is the role of the state in your mind? I mean, when you have school boards and private child cares and all the workforce agencies and all the higher ed institutions, they're all out there and they have their own different priorities in their given markets. What is the role for the state properly in the American education system? And what do you want for your state in the long run?
Locally administered. And I don't think really very few people would disagree that schools should be locally administered. I agree with that. But the rules of the playing field affect the decisions that are made day to day by superintendents and school boards. And we're responsible for those at the state level. Federal government's responsible for those at the federal level, making sure that the rules don't just convey more advantage onto those who are already advantaged, and the rules allow everybody to get a strong start and a good chance for success. We want to blur the lines between K-12 and higher ed, between early childhood education and K-12. I know that the public wants accountability and transparency. They, of course, value their schools to be administered locally. They need the freedom locally to make the changes and take the steps they need to innovate and close the achievement gap. But that also means that with that freedom comes the responsibility and the accountability. And it's the role of the honest brokers in state and federal government to make sure that that accountability and transparency exists.
And if you were to say, looking back on your time in office, that the state achieved something under your leadership, looking back on it, what would you like to be able to say?
Moving from laggard to leader in early childhood education, really preparing kids for success, whatever their route is. If they finish in high school, what's that skill they have? If they drop out of high school, what's that route for them? Is it a GED or is it a skill that they can market and do without a high school degree? If they go to community college or college, aligning that to the needs of the workforce. Really, both ends, of course, the quality of what comes in the middle. We want Colorado to be the very best place to raise a family.
Governor, I can tell you, I sometimes think this is as hard a time as certainly in my lifetime has ever been the case to be in public service. I think it's even a harder time to lead on issues and to lead in a way that's pragmatic and results oriented for the people of a given place or state. And I want to thank you for that, and to thank you and your whole team, and just know that many of us out here are watching with great admiration and inspiration. I thank you.
Thank you, John, and thanks to the Reagan Institute. It's an honor to join you today, and look forward to working with the broad coalition to prepare our kids for a bright future.
Likewise. Good luck with everything you're doing, Governor. Thank you.
Thank you.